when my 6-year-old daughter woke me in the middle of the night screaming, "Mom, there's a man under my bed." I thought it was just another nightmare. Kids have bad dreams all the time. I turned on the lamp, half asleep, trying to calm her down. But when I saw the sheer terror in her eyes, I knew this wasn't just a dream. Lila's tiny hands gripped her blanket so tight that her knuckles were white. Her voice shook as she whispered, "He was right here, Mom." He said my name. My heart started racing. I knelt beside her bed and looked underneath, expecting to find a fallen toy or maybe the shadow of her shoes. There was nothing, just darkness and dust. I smiled gently and tried to sound calm. "Sweetheart, there's no one here. You must have had a bad dream." She shook her head hard. "No, Mommy. He was there. He was watching me." I turned the light on, checked the corners of the room, the closet, even behind the curtains. Everything was perfectly normal. Still, I could feel this strange heaviness in the air. I tucked her back in, rubbing her hair until her breathing slowed, but even after she closed her eyes, I couldn't shake off that feeling. Before leaving the room, I made sure her window was locked. It was slightly open, which wasn't unusual since we'd left it cracked for fresh air earlier that day. I locked it and whispered, "You're safe now, baby. I promise." When I went back to my bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her words echo in my head. He said my name. I told myself it was just her imagination, that she must have seen a shadow or dreamed it. But something deep inside me felt unsettled, like a small part of me already knew this wasn't over. The rest of the night passed quietly, or maybe I was just too scared to notice every creak and rustle. By morning, the fear had faded into exhaustion, and I was ready to brush it off as nothing more than a child's nightmare. That is, until I walked into her room the next day. The sunlight streamed through the window, bright and warm, but what I saw made my whole body go cold. On the wooden floor, right next to Lila's bed, were small, muddy footprints. They started near her window and stopped right at the foot of her bed. I froze. My first thought was that maybe she had gone outside early, but when I looked closer, the prints weren't from her. They were bigger, too big for a child. My heart sank as I whispered to myself, "What in the world?" If you're still listening, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this is where the story really begins. Before that night, life was peaceful. I had just moved to a quiet little town in Oregon with my daughter Lila after my divorce. It was supposed to be our fresh start. A new house, a new neighborhood, and finally some peace after years of chaos. The house wasn't fancy, but it felt perfect for us. A 2-bedroom home with a small garden, creaky wooden floors, and an old oak tree that reached up past Lila's window. During the day, sunlight poured in through every corner, making it feel warm and alive. At night, it was quiet, sometimes too quiet, but I like to think of it as comforting silence. Lila adjusted quickly. She loved her new room, especially the big window that looked out over the backyard. She'd press her little hands against the glass and say, "Mom, I can see the stars from here." It made me smile every time. We had our own little routines. I made her pancakes every Sunday morning, and she always begged for extra syrup. After dinner, she'd crawl into my lap, and I'd read her favorite book until she drifted off to sleep. Every night, she'd ask, "You'll check under my bed, right?" And I'd laugh, peek under and say, "See? No monsters here." But about a week before the night she screamed, things started to feel different. She began waking up more often, saying she heard tapping on her window. I thought it was the branches of the oak tree brushing against the glass. I promised to trim them soon, and she seemed okay with that. Still, I started noticing little things. One evening, the window in her room was open when I could have sworn I had closed it earlier. Another time, I found one of her dolls sitting by the window ledge when she swore she hadn't touched it. I chalked it up to forgetfulness, or maybe her playing pretend. But Lila began to change. She was quieter, clingier, and didn't want to sleep alone anymore. When I asked what was wrong, she just said, "The man outside doesn't like it when I talk too loud." I laughed it off because I thought she was talking about a dream, but something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. Then came that night. the one where she woke me up screaming about a man under her bed. Now, standing in her room in the morning light, staring at those muddy footprints, I couldn't pretend anymore. Someone had been here. Someone had stood where my daughter slept, close enough to touch her. My hands trembled as I locked the window and checked every inch of the house. The back door was closed, but the latch looked loose, like it had been forced. I wanted to believe it was an animal, or maybe some local kid playing a prank, but deep down, I knew better. The footprints were too defined, too human. I looked over at Lila, sitting on her bed, her small hands clutching her stuffed rabbit. She looked scared, but calm, like she already knew I would find something. "Mommy," she said soft, "I told you he was real." That's when I realized my daughter had been telling the truth all along, and that the nightmare wasn't just hers anymore. I stood frozen in Lila's room, staring at the muddy footprints. The sunlight made them look more distinct, dark, wet, and freshly made. They started right under the window, trailed across the wooden floor, and stopped directly beside her bed. There were no smudges returning toward the window, no signs of someone climbing out. Whoever made them came in and never went back the same way. I forced myself to breathe. My mind scrambled for an explanation that didn't make my skin crawl. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe a neighbor's kid snuck in. Maybe I was losing it. I needed to convince myself of anything other than the truth staring back at me. I called for Lila, keeping my voice steady. She came in holding her stuffed rabbit, her eyes still puffy from sleep. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "did you get out of bed last night?" She shook her head, her voice small. "No, Mommy, he did." I crouched down, heart pounding. "Who, baby?" "The man," she whispered. "The one who hides when you come." Her words sent chills through me. I forced a smile I didn't feel. "There's no man here, Lila. Maybe you were dreaming again." But she didn't look convinced. She just pointed at the window. "He comes from there. He watches me sleep." I didn't know what to say. My instincts screamed at me to believe her, but my brain refused to. I spent the next hour cleaning the footprints, checking every lock, every window, every inch of that house. The back door latch was loose, too loose. I tightened it and swore to myself that I'd call someone to change the locks that day. After dropping Lila at school, I called the local police. A young officer named Daniels came by later that afternoon. He was polite but dismissive. I explained everything: the footprints, the open window, my daughter's fear. He walked around the house, taking a few notes, before giving me a reassuring smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, these things happen," he said. "Old houses have drafts. Maybe an animal got in. I don't see signs of forced entry." I crossed my arms. "Animals don't wear shoes." He chuckled lightly, as if trying to ease the tension. "You'd be surprised. Sometimes mud looks like a print. Still, I'll file a report. Probably just a one-time thing." When he left, I felt more uneasy than before. It wasn't that he didn't believe me. It was that he didn't want to. That night, I tucked Lila into my bed instead of hers. She fell asleep quickly, clutching her rabbit close. I stayed up, listening to every sound. The ticking clock, the faint hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Nothing unusual. Yet, around 2 a.m., I heard something faint, like a soft tap, tap, tap coming from down the hall. I held my breath, trying to pinpoint the sound. It was coming from Lila's room. My body stiffened, my heart hammering. Slowly, I stood up and took the flashlight from my nightstand. The hallway felt colder with every step. When I reached her door, the tapping stopped. I opened it and shone the light around the room. Everything looked normal. The curtains swayed slightly from the cracked window. The floor was clean. I was about to close the door when I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The small rug by her bed was crooked. I bent down to fix it and saw it. Another faint footprint, half dried, pressed into the wood beneath. I turned toward the window and felt a gust of cold air hit my face. The lock was undone again. I had locked it myself just hours ago. My hand trembled as I pushed it shut, snapping the latch firmly. When I turned off the flashlight, I caught my reflection in the window, and for a split second, I thought I saw another figure standing behind me. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. The next morning, I checked the yard outside. Fresh mud, bare footprints leading from the window toward the woods, each one deep and heavy, as if whoever made them was standing there for a long time, watching. I called Officer Daniels again. This time, I didn't care if I sounded crazy. "There's someone coming to my house at night," I said firmly. "There are footprints again. I'm not imagining this." He promised to send someone by, but no one came that day. I realized I couldn't wait for help. I needed proof. That evening, I drove to the nearest store and bought a small security camera. It wasn't expensive, but it was enough to capture motion. I set it up in Lila's room, aiming it toward the window. I didn't tell her about it. I didn't want her to feel scared or watched. Before bed, I locked every door and window twice. I placed a chair under the handle of the back door. Then I sat awake, watching the monitor on my laptop. The house was quiet, except for Lila's steady breathing from the next room. Midnight passed. Nothing. 1 o'clock. Still nothing. At 2:47 a.m., I saw movement. The camera picked up the curtains, shifting, slowly, unnaturally. Then the window slid open, just a few inches at first. A hand appeared, gripping the sill. I froze. The screen showed a shadow pulling itself inside, the shape of a man. He was tall, hunched, barefoot. He crawled across the floor toward the bed. My hands shook so badly that I almost dropped the laptop. The man stopped beside the bed, crouching low, and for a moment, he didn't move. Then he leaned close to Lila's face. His lips moved, like he was whispering. My stomach turned. I wanted to scream, to run into the room, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear, watching helplessly as he slid under her bed. Minutes later, I watched myself enter the room on the footage, panicked, looking under the bed just like before. He was gone. That night, I learned the truth. My daughter wasn't imagining anything. There had been someone in her room all along, and he had been hiding right beneath her. I didn't sleep after watching that footage. I sat on the floor with the laptop open in front of me, replaying the video again and again, hoping that somehow my eyes were wrong, that what I saw wasn't real. But it was. The man was there, crawling out of my daughter's window, moving like he'd done it 100 times before. I could see his face partially in the glow of the nightlight, pale skin, messy hair, a heavy shadow of stubble. He wasn't some ghost or shadow. He was flesh and blood, a real person, someone who had been inside my house. The worst part was the timestamp. It wasn't an isolated night. I scrolled back through older recordings, a few from nights before, and there he was again. Each time, the same routine. The window sliding open, his head peeking through. Sometimes he would stand at the foot of the bed for several minutes. Sometimes he'd kneel and whisper near Lila's ear. I felt sick watching it. My stomach churned as I realized I'd been sleeping peacefully while a stranger crept around my child's room in the dark. I called the police the next morning, voice shaking so badly that I could barely get the words out. This time, they took me seriously. Within an hour, 2 officers arrived at my house. I showed them the footage, the timestamps, everything. Officer Daniels was there again, but his easy smile was gone. His jaw was tight as he watched the clip. "Do you recognize this man?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I've never seen him in my life." They promised to send a team to search the area, especially the woods behind our house. One officer stayed behind to dust the windowsill for prints, while another questioned neighbors. I watched from the porch, hugging my arms tightly against my chest, fighting the urge to cry. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. How long had this man been here? How many nights had he stood over my daughter's bed while I slept down the hall, completely unaware? By evening, the police returned with news that made my skin crawl. They had found a campsite deep in the trees, about a half-mile from the back of our yard. There were old food wrappers, an empty water jug, and piles of newspaper. But what they found next made my blood run cold. In a torn backpack were photographs, dozens of them. Every single one was of Lila. Some were zoomed in through her window. Others were from the park, the school playground, and even our backyard. There were pictures of me, too, cooking in the kitchen, hanging laundry, sitting on the porch. He had been watching us for weeks, maybe months. Officer Daniels's face was grim when he handed me one of the photos. It was of Lila sitting on the swing set, smiling, sunlight in her hair. The angle was wrong, too close. "We'll find him," he said firmly. "We think he's been living in those woods for a while." That night, I didn't let Lila out of my sight. She sat on my lap as I told her we were going to sleep in my room for a few days. "Are the police going to get the man?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "They will." Still, sleep didn't come easily. Every sound made me jump, every creak of the walls, every gust of wind brushing against the windows. Around midnight, I grabbed my phone and re-watched the footage again, trying to convince myself it was all in the past now. But as the video played, I noticed something I hadn't before. In one of the clips, after the man whispered to Lila and crawled under the bed, I saw her move slightly. She opened her eyes for a second, looked straight toward the camera, and smiled. It was small, almost sleepy, but it was there. Then she turned over and went back to sleep. My heart dropped. The next morning, I confronted her gently. "Lila, honey," I said, "do you remember when the man came into your room?" She frowned, twisting the ears of her stuffed rabbit. "Sometimes. He says not to tell." "What does he say to you?" Her little voice was calm, too calm. "He says he wants to be my friend, that he likes when I sing to him." I felt tears sting my eyes. "You don't ever talk to him again, okay? If he tries to talk to you, you come to me right away." She nodded slowly, but her gaze drifted toward the window as if expecting him to appear. By the afternoon, the police had identified the man. His name was Caleb Ross, a 38-year-old drifter who had been reported multiple times in nearby towns for trespassing and burglary. He'd done handyman work for people, earning their trust before things went missing. When they showed me his photo, my blood turned to ice. It was the same face from the footage. They believed he'd been living in abandoned sheds and moving from house to house across the county. Later that night, as I sat watching Lila draw at the kitchen table, Officer Daniels called to tell me they were setting up patrol cars around our neighborhood. "We'll find him soon," he promised. "Just keep your doors locked and stay inside tonight." I thanked him and hung up, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I went to check the back door again, making sure it was locked tight. When I turned back toward the living room, I froze. Lila was no longer sitting at the table. Her crayons were scattered across the floor, the chair slightly pulled back. My heart lurched as I called her name. "Lila?" Then I heard it, the faint creak of her window opening from down the hall. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. When I reached her room, the curtains were blowing softly in the cold air. The window was wide open, the latch broken. And on the windowsill, clear as day, were fresh, muddy footprints. He had come back. My scream tore through the house. "Lila!" I ran to the window and leaned out, scanning the yard below. The night air was cold and damp, the grass glistening with dew. The footprints were fresh, large, muddy, pressed deep into the soil. They led away from the window toward the woods. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I didn't think. I didn't call anyone. I just ran. I bolted out the back door barefoot, the ground freezing beneath my feet. The flashlight in my hand shook violently as I followed the trail. "Lila!" I called again, my voice breaking. The only sound that answered was the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of crickets. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to wait for the police. But a mother's fear drowns out reason. The prints led straight into the trees, winding through the dark path behind our yard. The deeper I went, the colder it got. Branches snapped under my feet, and my breath came out in sharp bursts. The flashlight's beam bounced across the forest floor until it landed on something small, a piece of pink fabric caught on a low branch. I grabbed it with trembling hands. It was from Lila's pajama sleeve. "Lila!" I shouted again, louder this time. My voice echoed into the woods. Then, faintly, I heard it. A small, muffled sound, a whimper. My heart nearly stopped. I turned toward it and ran. The sound grew louder, a child's sob. "Mommy!" I followed the voice until I saw her, standing near a cluster of trees, barefoot and crying, her hair tangled, her pajama top torn at the shoulder. I ran to her and dropped to my knees, pulling her into my arms. "Oh, thank God," I whispered. "You're okay. You're okay." But before I could even breathe, I heard a low voice behind me. She shouldn't have left the window open. I spun around. My flashlight beam landed on him, the man from the videos, Caleb Ross. His eyes gleamed in the light, hollow and cold. He looked thinner than he did in the footage, his skin pale, his clothes torn and covered in dirt. He took a step forward, and I pulled Lila closer, my back pressing against a tree. "Stay away from us," I shouted. He tilted his head, a strange smile forming on his lips. "You didn't have to make this hard, Sarah. I just wanted to see her again. She reminds me of my little girl." I blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "She was about Lila's age," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I lost her years ago. People took her from me. They said I wasn't fit to be a father." His gaze shifted to Lila, softening for a second before turning dark again. "But Lila understands me. She talks to me. She's not scared like the others were." My blood ran cold. "You're sick," I hissed. He took another step closer. "I'm not sick. I'm just lonely. You didn't even know I was there most nights. I could have taken her any time, but I didn't. I was careful. I watched. I protected her." I gripped a fallen branch beside me, holding it tight like a weapon. "You broke into my home. You terrified my daughter." His face twisted. "You don't understand. You never did. You mothers never listen, always keeping them from us." He lunged. I swung the branch with everything I had. It connected with a crack against his shoulder. He stumbled, growling in pain, and I grabbed Lila's hand. "Run!" We tore through the trees, branches clawing at our clothes and skin. I didn't look back, not even when I heard him crashing through the undergrowth behind us. The flashlight flickered and went out, leaving us in almost total darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of our house through the trees. "Keep running, baby!" I gasped. "Don't stop!" Lila's small hand gripped mine tightly, her sobs breaking through the silence. I could hear Caleb's footsteps getting closer, heavy, erratic, desperate. My lungs burned, but the sight of the house kept me moving. We burst out of the woods and into the yard. I could see the porch light still on. I shoved Lila ahead of me toward the door. "Inside now!" She ran up the steps, and just as I reached the porch, a hand grabbed my ankle, yanking me backward. I fell hard, the wind knocked out of me. Caleb's face was inches from mine now, his breath hot and foul. "You can't take her from me again!" he shouted. Adrenaline surged through me. I kicked him in the chest, breaking free, and scrambled up the steps. I slammed the door shut and locked it just as he threw his shoulder against it. The wood groaned under the impact. Lila was crying in the hallway, calling my name. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I screamed into the receiver. "He's here! He's trying to break in! Please hurry!" The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, but before I could answer, the pounding stopped. The silence was almost worse than the noise. I held my breath, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles ached. Then, from the back of the house, I heard glass shatter. He was inside. I grabbed a kitchen knife and rushed to Lila, pulling her into my arms. "We're going to the bathroom," I whispered. "Stay quiet." We locked ourselves in and crouched in the corner, my arms wrapped around her trembling body. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow, deliberate. He was searching for us. The handle rattled once, twice. Then nothing. A minute later, I heard sirens in the distance. Relief and fear clashed in my chest. Caleb must have heard them too, because the next sound was the back door slamming shut and footsteps running across the porch. When the police arrived, they found muddy prints leading from our back door into the woods again. They searched for hours before finally finding him hiding in an old shed behind a neighbor's property. He was arrested without a fight. When they brought me outside to identify him, he looked calm, almost peaceful. As they led him away, he smiled at me and whispered, "You can't keep her safe forever." The chill that ran through me that night never really left. Because for the first time, I realized evil doesn't always come from strangers you meet on dark roads or in bad neighborhoods. Sometimes, it lives quietly in the woods behind your house, waiting for you to let your guard down. The next morning, The sun rose over our house as if nothing had happened, but everything inside me had changed. The police stayed for hours, moving in and out, taking photos, and collecting evidence. I sat at the kitchen table wrapped in a blanket, holding Lila close to my chest. She had fallen asleep in my arms, her tiny hand still clutching her stuffed rabbit, unaware of how close she had come to being taken. Every sound from the police radios made me flinch. Every question felt like a reminder that I had failed to keep her safe. Officer Daniels approached quietly, setting a mug of coffee in front of me. "You did everything right," he said softly. "You protected your daughter. That's what matters." I nodded, but my eyes stayed fixed on the window. Beyond the glass, the trees stood still, silent, harmless looking, yet I couldn't stop picturing the man's face, that twisted calmness when they arrested him, the way his voice echoed in my head. "You can't keep her safe forever." Those words cut deeper than anything else, because they weren't just a threat, they were a truth I had to face. No parent can protect their child from everything. The police told me that Caleb Ross would be held without bail. They found evidence linking him to other break-ins across the county, even some unsolved cases involving missing children years ago. When they searched his campsite again, they discovered more photographs, notebooks, and letters written in uneven handwriting. Most were addressed to "my little girl." The detectives believed he had lost his daughter years before and had started fixating on other children who reminded him of her. It was horrifying, but in a way, it explained the strange obsession. He wasn't a ghost or a monster from under the bed. He was a broken man whose sickness had turned into something terrifying, and somehow that made it even worse, because he looked ordinary. He could have been anyone. For weeks after his arrest, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. I installed a full security system, new locks, motion lights, everything I could think of. Still, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find myself staring at the window, waiting to see a shadow that wasn't there. Lila had nightmares too. She'd wake up crying, saying she saw the man from the woods in her dreams. The therapist told me it was normal, that trauma can live inside a child's imagination long after the danger is gone. I told Lila she was safe, over and over again, until I almost believed it myself. Slowly, things began to settle. The house didn't feel like a home anymore, though. Every room carried memories I didn't want. The muddy footprints, the broken window, the fear in my daughter's eye. After a month, I made the decision to move. We packed up what little we had and left that place behind. Our new home was smaller, but brighter. I picked an apartment on the 3rd floor, far from the ground, with windows that didn't open easily. The first night we stayed there, Lila slept soundly for the first time since it all happened. I sat by her bed, watching her chest rise and fall, and realized I hadn't truly breathed in weeks. In the following months, I tried to focus on rebuilding our life. I went back to work, enrolled Lila in a new school, and met neighbors who felt safe to talk to. We made new memories, baking cookies on weekends, watching movies under a blanket, planting flowers on the balcony instead of in the yard. But even as life returned to normal, the fear never fully disappeared. Sometimes, when I walk past a playground or a schoolyard and see another parent looking away for just a second, I want to scream, "Don't." Because danger doesn't always knock on the front door. Sometimes it climbs quietly through the window. I still check under Lila's bed every night, not because I think he'll come back, but because I promised her I would. And maybe, deep down, I need that routine too. A small act of control in a world that reminded me how fragile safety can be. A few weeks ago, I received a letter from the police. They wanted to inform me that Caleb Ross had been transferred to a psychiatric facility. The note said he had stopped speaking altogether. He just sat in his cell most days, staring at the wall, whispering to himself. They couldn't make out most of what he said, except for one thing that he repeated often. "She still sings to me." I don't know what that means. Maybe it's a sign of his fading mind. Or maybe he's still trapped in the same delusion that brought him to my house. Either way, I'm done letting his shadow haunt us. Now, when Lila wakes up from a bad dream, I remind her that we're safe, that the man is gone and that no one will ever hurt her again. And when she asks why I still keep the bedroom light on, I tell her, it's not because I'm scared. It's because light has a way of reminding the dark that it's not welcome anymore. I've learned something from all of this. Evil doesn't always look evil. It hides in plain sight, behind polite smiles, quiet voices, and harmless appearances. But instinct, especially a mother's, is rarely wrong. If something feels off, it probably is. Now, every time Lila runs into my arms after school, every time I hear her laughter fill the room, I hold her a little tighter, because I know how close I came to losing her, and I never take that for granted again. So if you're a parent watching this, remember, listen when your child tells you they're scared. Don't dismiss it as imagination. Sometimes fear is the only thing keeping you safe. If this story made you feel something or reminded you how precious safety really is, make sure to subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And tonight, before you go to sleep, maybe check under your bed one more time, just to be sure. To be